hall meeting. We've got about 20 people we're expecting live here this evening and about another 50 online. So some people didn't want to get in their cars and come and visit with us, which is okay. So my name is Paul Sharman, as some of you may know. You can't really avoid the picture, so I apologize for that. As you know, I've been your Ward 5 councillor for the last 14 years and having been through 4 elections, so some of you voted for me, maybe not. In any event, so I just wanted to start off this evening's discussion by talking a little bit about the topic and why it's so important to us. And I'm grateful that you're all here, and I know that you're going to have a lot of questions, so we're anticipating you've got time to ask questions. We want you to ask questions. We'll look forward to them. And so we're going to have a presentation from our planning department folks. With us this evening we have Director Jamie Tellier, Senior Manager of Planning, Carl Plass, Special Policy, and is that the right name? Senior Manager for Planning. And they will be talking about the development situation we find ourselves in and how we can take steps to adapt it to provide a better quality of life for our communities as change happens. We have Richard Bellemare in the back, who's one of our whiz kids on the technology, and Dave Thompson, and also my colleague Brianne Bradbury, who's been citing you in and who you've been communicating with along the way. You know, the premise of this discussion was everybody wants to talk about development because so much is changing. And I appreciate that the Alinea discussion about the property across the road at Fairview and Appleby Line created quite a lot of anxiety simply because of the size of the scale of it. And I fully understand why there would be concern about it, and we need to talk about those things. The drivers of these things are, of course, aging population. So some of us are older and living in our homes still, and then there are that we have an increasing number of older adults to the point that we now have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 15, and that is causing all sorts of economic problems for the country, leading us to worry, like 50 years down the road with the childbirth rates we have, what the implications will be for our communities. And then we've got the economics being driven by the federal government and the province to want to backfill workforce with immigration. I'm not really debating whether you agree with that or not. It's just that's the way it's being positioned. That's what they believe. So, we have immigrants coming in. We have a severe housing shortage. COVID caught us out. We didn't build much for 2 years. That caused an economic decline. That caused interest rates to grow. And that just made our housing situation worse. So here we are in a situation where everybody's upset about costs going up, inflation. Nobody can afford to buy a house. Young people over the age of about 35, if they're not in the market, it's going to be a tough haul to get in the market. So we're expecting that we'll see more rental properties. And I know everybody's saying we've got so many high density, tall buildings in Burlington happening right now, and the answer is we actually aren't seeing a lot right now because they're not being built yet. And that's because the banks won't finance them, because nobody's buying them. So we have a pause at the moment. But I'm not going to tell you the story because we've got Alison and Jamie and Kyle to talk about it. Along the way, we will talk about development across the city. We'll talk about the drivers of the change. We'll talk about development across the city that we have now, the number of applications we have in the process. We'll talk about particular buildings in Ward 5 that you would like to talk about. And so you can ask questions and say, what's the situation with Lakeside Plaza? We'll be happy to answer all those questions. And that being said, I've introduced already Jamie and Alison and Kyle. Who's going to go first? Thank you very much for coming, and I welcome you to the microphone. And we've got some seats over here. We can sit down and see you.
Thanks, Councillor Sharman. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Oh, thanks. So I'm just going to set a bit of context. Councillor Sharman also sort of started down the road that I'm going to start us at, and that's a bit about demographics, a bit about affordability, and those sorts of things. Then I'm going to layer in a lot of the change that we've been seeing in the past few years. I'm going to talk a little bit about our official plan, the housing pledge, some changes to legislation and planning frameworks. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the things at the policy level that you can start getting involved in so that you can help shape the city's response to a lot of these issues. So we're in a significant time of change. You will be forgiven if you haven't followed the to's and fro's of planning, framework changes, and legislative changes. I think you can skip to the next slide. On a daily basis, we hear news about needing more housing, needing more affordable housing, and sort of mentions of the troubles in the market. So I'll start with aging. Councillor Sharman also highlighted that right away. Right now, Burlington has the highest average age in Halton Region of all the municipalities, and our 65-plus age group is outpacing growth in every other age group. And that relationship to the under 29 is noted because that group, 29 and younger, has declined, and the biggest decline is children age 0 to 14. That also leads to a decline in the working age population, of course. Next slide. And then we can talk about housing affordability. Obviously, for everyone in this room, you're aware that housing affordability is deteriorating, and that's particularly pronounced for rental households. I won't go into all the details here, but we all feel it, I'm sure. Next slide, please. And I'll just talk very briefly about household income. So the median household income after tax income increased by 9.3% from 2015 to 2020. Detached housing prices increased by over 30%, 31%. Condos increased by 44%, and rents increased by almost 25%. So obviously we understand the underlying issue with affordability. Next slide, please. So this slide, I won't get into much of the detail about this, but it's an important concept, and it's called core housing need. That could have you in a place that's too small for you, is in disrepair, or it's too expensive for you to afford. So this core housing need, again, is more pronounced in that renter household, and it's a trend we're following over time. Next slide, please. So now let's set a little bit of the frame of what we're expecting. So I'll start with the official plan, and then we'll layer in the housing pledge, and then we'll talk about growth to 2051 and beyond. But I'll start with the housing pledge because it's right there. 29,000 units by 2031. Have any of you heard about the housing pledge? So the city has committed to the creation of more housing and more diverse housing options. And we're facing many challenges in the creation of those houses. But all levels of government, of course, are banding behind actions towards it. I'll speak a little bit later to the city's housing strategy because that's an important part of our approach to dealing with it. Then expected to grow to 265,000 people by 2051. For a number of reasons, which we'll get into in the next slide or two, 265,000 by 2051, we could be looking at more than 265,000 by 2051. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then I'll just layer in at the highest level our official plan, and Councillor Sharman's already mentioned the Alinea proposal, pre-con, that's in the Appleby Go MTSA. That is the area of the city where we're expecting to see significant change and growth over the very long term. Next slide, please. This gives you an overview of the city's growth framework, we call it. So the deepest reds are those areas where we're going to see the most significant change in growth. Going to the oranges, which is our corridors. Think about our commercial plazas, our aging plazas in the city. and then down into our neighborhood areas, essentially. Also in the darker purple are our current employment areas. So that gives you a sense of how we break down the urban area and where we're expecting to see growth and where we're expecting to see little change. Like the green areas are our natural heritage system. That's where we're expecting to see less change and protection for the long term. Next slide, please. And this is what I was alluding to when I said more than 265,000 people potentially. So recently, through changes made to the region's official plan, subsequently supported by City Council, there are a few new elements that were never really anticipated in our city's official plan. I'll start with new urban areas, and I'll direct you to the far left of the screen to the Waterdown Road area and the Highway 6 area. So there are two new urban areas. One is an expansion to the existing urban area, and another is truly a new urban area. A long-standing development application that has been with the city for 10, 20, 30 years. So through those changes, they are actually now going to be urban area. And a whole bunch of things will happen as we grapple with what that means to the structure of the city. Then I'm going to point out two other areas. The other two red circles, let's start in our ward here that we're working in. Brawny Creek Meadows, right beside Brawny Creek Provincial Park. That right now you'd see woodlots and field right now. That area had for many years been planned to be employment. And through some changes, we're now looking at that area as a new community area. So it will no longer only be employment area. We've just started the engagement on that. I have a few panels at the side, so if you want to talk in more detail after the conversation, be happy to help. And there'll be links to how to get engaged in that process as we move along. But that's really critical for Ward 5. And then if you can picture yourself down on Plains Road by the Aldershot Go MTSA, the area between the 403 and the rail line, that's colloquially known as 1200 King Road. And that, again, was another employment area that is now going to be a new community area. A little bit more of a challenging process there, but council has seen a bit of a vision for that area, and there will be more work coming forward as we move along. And then the layer that we've known for quite some time are the yellow, the big thick yellow boundaries. So those are our MTSAs, and those are the areas I referenced at the very beginning. So our official plans always set out, here's where we think we're going to have new homes, here's where we think we're going to have new jobs. And that growth framework I showed you starts to say, here's the areas where we're going to be focused either on investment in planning or investment in infrastructure and moving these things along. I think what doesn't change with the changes that I've just highlighted is that intensification is still critical to Burlington. We're not adding reams of land to the urban area. We really still need to stay true to that focus of using the land and the infrastructure we have right now the best we can. I think that's all I wanted to say on that slide. Can you? Yeah, and I think that I covered that okay. I'll go back. This is really related to Housing Pledge. But even before the city signed on to a housing pledge, they developed a housing strategy. And that housing strategy has a big vision that is very long-term. And it's the idea that everyone's welcome in Burlington. The housing strategy itself sets a roadmap for the actions that the city will have to take and how it can be engaged with other levels of government that are doing work like building homes. The city of Burlington doesn't build houses. But we set the framework, we build, we remove barriers, and we make sure we've got the conditions for success. The only other thing I wanted to highlight is that in building the housing strategy and signing on to the housing pledge, we need to think about things differently. So not only are those big changes in those new areas important, we're needing to think slightly differently about our neighborhood areas. And as of, I think, October of last year, Council gave staff a direction to say, look at the urban area, look at the residential area in the city, and let's talk about how to accommodate 4 units on our lots within the residential area. What we found through the housing strategy is that there is a lack of diversity. There are lots of townhouses, there are lots of single homes, but there's not a lot of what I think you may have heard people call the missing middle, are those types of slightly more affordable, maybe slightly smaller, a little bit more manageable for people to afford. So I think skip to the next slide. And I'm going to bounce back to the major transit station areas and just say that we've been through a really significant stage with council. We've got the official plan amendment adopted by council, and it's with the minister now for approval. The next steps will happen this fall, going into next year. Will be actually coming forward with the implementation bylaw. So it's like a zoning bylaw with a few added bonuses of allowing us to think a little bit differently, adding conditions to development permits, talking a little bit about how do we accommodate or require affordable housing, how do we require more parkland dedication, all in an effort to think of those MTSAs a little bit differently. They're going to be places where a lot of people are going to live, and we need to set the balance right now and make sure that we're supporting them. I think COVID was already mentioned, I don't know, in one of the conversations I had, but one of the things I think COVID really crystallized for everyone is needing those spaces for relief, the green spaces, and that sort of counterpoint to when you have a lot of development, just to have that relief. Next slide, please. So I've talked a little bit about all the changes we've seen that actually are changes to the fundamentals of the official plan that we have been working with. We are still seeing more change from the provincial government, and we have an opportunity now to take all this new information and galvanize it into a new local vision about how we're going to grow and change and respond to all these challenges. So part of targeted realignment is not only doing sort of area-specific planning for Bronny Creek Meadows, for example, but thinking about how changes to the overall structure impact, how are we going to make sure we have enough jobs? How are we going to make sure that we're accommodating more people? How are we making sure that we have sufficient infrastructure and parks and community amenities to support all this new growth as well? So at that highest policy level, we are going to be embarking on those discussions. There'll be a lot of different discussions. So I've already highlighted Bronny Creek Meadows. Another discussion that's going to be starting really soon is connected to that 4 units as of right. We're going to start engagement. We want to hear from the public about how we're structuring the official plan and how we structure the bylaw ultimately to accommodate those units in a way that works with our unique situation in Burlington. And I think that may be it for my slides. Can you go to the next? Yeah. So that just gives you the Coles Notes version of what's happening at the policy level. We'll have a few links to more information, and you can talk to me after the conversation.
Thanks very much, Allison, and Councillor Sharman, really for setting the context for the discussion that I'm going to get into. I think when we understand some of the challenges that the city is facing, then that helps us to understand some of the development pressures, and then ultimately the development proposals that we're seeing come forward and what those look like and how we're addressing those. But ultimately what we want to ensure is that we're all working together to achieve some of the goals that collectively we all want to achieve. And there's really an opportunity for everyone within the city to plug into the planning process to ensure that you can participate and have your voice heard. So thanks again for that overview at this point. So what I wanted to start off by saying is, we've heard the context, we've heard some of the challenges, we've heard that there's a need for the city to grow. So what does that look like? How do we actually achieve that? And one of the things that we're looking at the city is the use of technology and how technology can enable new housing within the city of Burlington. And so you'll see on this slide, there's a number of different initiatives that we're working on from a technology perspective. The first is really harnessing the power of artificial intelligence. And you'll likely hear that in a variety of different contexts, but it's no different at the city within the planning department. We're seeing that as an opportunity to really harness that technology and assist us in the review of applications moving forward so that we can condense timelines and we can get through the approval of new developments in a quicker fashion. So there's two pilot projects that we've been running over the last while. The first one relates to our zoning bylaw. And really what artificial intelligence will allow us to do, it will allow development proponents to submit their plans through this system, and it will complete essentially a review of the plans automatically, almost in real time, and provide a developer with feedback as to where the proposal meets the objectives of the city, but where it may also be offside. So what some of the challenges are with their proposal. So even before they come to us with an application, they'll have the benefit of understanding what our expectations are for new development in terms of building heights, setbacks to property lines, those sorts of things, so that they can determine whether or not they're going to plug into that framework or whether they're going to seek relief from some of those requirements. So there's a number of benefits to doing that. And in the city of Burlington, we're pretty innovative on this approach. I think we're the second city in Canada to actually use artificial intelligence. I believe Vancouver is the first. And so we're sort of on the front lines of this. If all goes well with this pilot project, I expect that we'll be able to scale this up and not just look at it from a zoning perspective, but we can also probably look at it in other aspects of development review. So we think it has a lot of potential in terms of all the things that I've mentioned so far. So that's the first thing that we're going to look to AI to assist with. The second thing is with respect to Ontario Building Code reviews. So when a development has approval, they come to our building department and seek a building permit. And if anyone's been through that process, it can be a challenging process. The Ontario Building Code is an extremely lengthy and very technical document. And so in order to get a building permit, you have to comply with that. And so this, again, is an opportunity for somebody that wants to submit a building permit to run their plans electronically through our system. The AI will do essentially a review and then provide that applicant with feedback as to some of the deficiencies that may exist with their proposal, areas for improvement, et cetera, before they even come to the city. So we really see this as an opportunity to condense things and relieve some of the frustration that exists through the building permit process as well. So that's the first thing is artificial intelligence. The second thing is improvements to our pre-building approval process. So in March of last year, we undertook a pretty comprehensive review of the approvals that are needed before somebody actually obtains a building permit. So if they need an engineering clearance or they need a forestry clearance, if anyone's ever put an addition on their house as an example, or put a swimming pool in, they'll know the approvals that are required to do that. And so this system allows a user to submit their plans electronically, and it also allows that user to see exactly where their application is at. Similar to if you order a package on Amazon, you can kind of track that and know exactly where you're at. The same sort of system that we're rolling out. And again, this is something that we intend to scale. I'll speak about that a little bit more detail later in the presentation for some of the larger application that we have. And the third thing I think is I've coined here unleashing the power of data. And this is something that we are working towards. The city has recently established a pipeline to permit committee, and it's really understanding how many housing units do we currently have in our pipeline, how many are being proposed, how many have approval, and everything in between. to understand how are we positioning ourselves to meet the demand of housing that the city has currently, but also moving forward. And so I'll speak to that a little bit more. If you're looking for a link to that, it's up on the screen, www.burlington.ca/pipeline to permit. And I'll have that up again on the screen later, but if I could just get the next slide, please. So if you go to that webpage, what you'll find is a link to what we're calling our dashboard. And what this has is all of the development activity and all the information. Is it possible to turn the lights down maybe at the front? Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I'll give you a high-level overview of what's displayed here. But if you have a chance to check out the actual link, you'll have access to all of this information. So this is just a screenshot that I took of the web page a few days ago just to illustrate the information that we now have available. I'll just give them a second to figure out the lights here. Probably doesn't help with the sun beaming in on the side here. I can see my shadow. Maybe just as we're on this slide, we'll go this way, and then we can turn the lights back on. Thanks. So what this slide is showing, it's really our dashboard. And so the public now has access. Anyone who has an interest in this has access to all of the information within what we call our pipeline. So anytime there's a developer that approaches the city with an idea saying, I'm looking to develop a property, here's what I'm thinking, all the way to developments that have their full approvals in place and that may in some cases even have a building permit. All of that data is now available on the city's webpage. And so you can see here it lists the number of units that we have. So on the top right, 44,000 approximately, 44,000 units within our pipeline. And again, that varies from some of those development proposals that are just conceptual at this stage. They're very early on in the process. There's still much more work to be done on those, including getting decisions from council and approvals, all the way to those developments that are approved and may be under construction already. So the full range there. You can see the statuses are broken down. So we've got pre-application, that again is those conceptual units. Those are shown in the yellow. So the majority of the units that we have in our pipeline, almost 50%, are those units that are still somewhat conceptual and still have to go through the process, a variety of processes in some cases before they get their approvals. We also have units that are under review. So in those cases where we receive a development application and we're actively engaging and reviewing that proposal, we may have public meetings with the community to get your feedback on those applications, but still require a council decision. You'll see those in the lighter blue color, sorry, the middle blue color. About 14% of those are under review. The darker blue, navy blue color is appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So these are files where there may have been a decision of council that stakeholders have disagreed with and have appealed that to the provincial level for a decision. Or it could be situations where there's a file where at the local level the city has not made a decision and the developer has chosen to escalate their file to the provincial level for a decision. So that's shown in the darker blue color there. So about 8% of our units are within that category, or just shy of 4,000 units that are before the Ontario Land Tribunal at this point. In the light blue color, waiting for site plan application, this indicates units that have made their way through the process to a certain degree, have received a council decision, so the zoning is in place to allow those units to proceed, but we still need to review the technical details of their proposal. So we need to understand what the building looks like, how is it going to be accessed, where's the driveway going to be, how many lights are they going to have, what is all of those technical details, what does that look like? So that signals that those units are moving forward, but there's still work to be done on them. And that's about 11% of the units that we have in our pipeline, about 4,700 units in that category. And then the final category is planning approved. So these are development projects that have full approval and are, in some cases, under construction already. And so you can see those, that is about 13% of the units, or just shy of 6,000 units that have received full planning approval. So again, all of this data, and if you look at the bottom, you can break it down by the project itself. So if you're interested in a specific project in a neighborhood, you can find that information here and find out more details about the course that those applications have taken. This data is updated every day, every morning at 6 a.m. It's refreshed, and it's pulled right out of our system. So it's as accurate and up-to-date as possible, and really is a resource that we're tapping into to kind of convey the picture where we're at, efficiencies that we need to make to our process, opportunities for improvement, but also reporting outwards in terms of what we have in our overall supply. Next slide, please. I see a couple hands, and maybe we'll just hold off on questions till the end. I think we're planning to have a question and answer period just after the presentation. So only a couple more slides to get through. So still on that same web page, there's a couple tabs along the top. So the one that we just went over was the very left, planning pipeline. If you go a couple tabs to the right, you'll see the project location map. And this is the same information displayed visually about where those projects are actually taking place throughout the city. So you can see here a number of different development proposals throughout the city, a number here in Ward 5. But the majority of the application proposals at this point are within the west end of the city, in Ward 1 in the Aldershot area around our Aldershot GO station. Also, there's a number of development activities, projects that are underway around our Burlington GO station, as well as between that area and our downtown. But that being said, there's projects happening in every ward of the city as well. So all that information is available. Next slide, please. So there's an opportunity here if you have an interest in a specific development project. So there's one happening in your neighborhood as an example that you want to find out more details about. We also have development project web pages that are available. And on these web pages, they're a hive of information that is available to you. The link to that is www.burlington.ca/development. And every one of those projects, so every one of those dots that you saw on the previous slide, will have a project web page dedicated to it. And again, on that web page, you'll find information such as who the applicant is or the developer. You'll find contact information for planning staff. You'll find contact information for the applicant. Any materials that they've submitted with their application, so plans, supporting studies, reports, all of that information is housed on these project web pages. So all of that information is publicly available. You can review that at any time and then provide your feedback directly to us at the city. Next slide, please. So here's an example of one of those project web pages. I just pulled one from the many that we have available just to kind of illustrate to you the type of information that we have on those web pages. So you can see that this is just, again, an example. We've got the applicant at the top. We've got their contact information. There will be proposal details housed here. And there's a neat feature as well that if you're interested in staying up to date on one of those files, you can actually subscribe by hitting the subscribe button, highlighted in red there in the top right corner. And what that will do is provide you with an automatic email notification anytime that there's an update to that file. So if there's a public meeting that's been booked, you would receive an email. If the applicant submits new plans to the city for review, you'd receive an email of that. So it's a handy way to stay informed with new development proposals. If there's one that you're specifically interested, you could subscribe to that webpage. If you're interested in all of the development happening in Ward 5, you can also subscribe to the Ward 5 webpage. Or even citywide, if you're interested in any new development applications, you can subscribe to that. So different options for you to plug into that process. Next slide. So here's the development application review process that's typical for a situation or a development that is proposing an official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, or in some cases a plan of subdivision. So new tall buildings, for example, mixed-use buildings, mid-rise apartment buildings, these would generally go through this type of a process to receive a council decision before they proceed to the building permit phase. So a number of steps here. I won't go through them in great detail, other than to say that there are opportunities for you to participate in that process should you wish to do so. So every one of those projects will have a city planner assigned to it who kind of guides the application through the various steps. And you can see in the arrows on this screen that there are a number of opportunities for you to participate. So you can submit comments, you can contact the applicant or the city planner directly to ask any questions about the proposal. There's also an opportunity for you to delegate to city council when that report, a report recommending a decision goes forward. So you have your opportunity to touch base with council members as well before a decision is made. So lots of opportunities for you to plug in. If you're looking for if you have any questions about any of those steps, we can definitely touch base afterwards and we can kind of walk through those as well. Next slide, please. So that wraps up the development review side of the presentation. I've got our contact information here, and all the various web pages that I have kind of gone over are also available here. And maybe with that, I'll hand things back to Councillor Sharman, and we'll get into some question and answers.
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll have the lights. Is that better with the lights on? Or we can keep it in the dark if you like. Thank you very much, Alison and Kyle. What I'd like to proceed with is answer your questions, so please we'll put up your hands if you want to ask a question. I'm going to ask those online to please put your question into chat. Did I get that right? Okay, so Brienne's looking after that. Okay, very good. So what we'll do is we'll mix up the questions between those we get from online and those we have in the room. And I know we had a couple of hands up earlier, so Ted, go ahead.
Just a quick question on that pipeline. I'm curious, what I didn't see there is building permit issue. Like, in other words, okay, you've got planning approval, but hey, really, to measure what's actually going, not necessarily construction start, but hey, how many are approved?
Yeah, it's a great question.
You know? Yeah. Otherwise, it's just pie in the sky. Because once you get to that green, hey, so if you can't get the finance, you could sit in that last bar forever.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so this dashboard is a work in progress. This is our first version of the dashboard that we've released. It's really focused on the planning data. So once it gets to a planning approval stage, has a decision, there also is more information. I didn't get into it, but there also is a companion dashboard for building permit activity. And so all of that is available to outline how many units our building department is currently processing. What we want to do in the fullness of time is combine those two dashboards together to tell the full journey of an application.
Well,
So
exactly, because, you know, I know neighbors, waiting quite some time, for a building permit. That's a little more detail, even how many permits are in pipeline, how many are approved.
yeah, for sure.
Might get Brienne pointing fingers at me for a second. Oh, I beg your pardon. So just before we leave that question, keep in mind that this dashboard has really only evolved over the last 4 months, and we were very excited to see that we were having demonstrated to us we were having demonstrated to us that we can do sorts on that database live, so we can do that sort of thing, which is pretty spectacular. And I won't carry on from it, but please take a look at it, and it's going to be more and more user-friendly. Yes, sir, go ahead.
I understand that it's in development, but I guess for the sake of information for the public, do you guys consider having the amount of time that the application is in the process of, from when it gets, I guess, submitted to the city in the planning, how much time that takes on average for the amount of projects that you guys get to approval at the planning, and then how much time in the city the building permit process takes for the city to output either comments or approvals. Because from what you kind of demonstrated, it does show how many are being inputted and how many are being accepted or not. But I think the real issue for the public is the amount of time it takes within the city for project, whether it be an addition or 10-story building, to actually get from the beginning to how long it takes to get approved.
Yeah, it's a great question. And in my presentation, I mentioned having transparency into the process is helpful. And so a lot of times if people have the information that they're looking for, they don't inquire as to where things at because they know where they're at. The provincial government is also very focused on ensuring that we're timely in terms of our planning process, as well as our building permit process. And so one of the things that we're working towards is looking at efficiencies in terms of how quickly can we process these types of development applications to get people to the approval stage quicker. So that's a work in progress, a number of initiatives underway to streamline that and make that more efficient, including providing timelines on the dashboard is something that we're definitely looking at. The province on the planning side has actually mandated that we have to make a decision on planning applications within a specified time period. You may have heard that there were financial penalties if municipalities did not do that. Over the last while, they introduced new legislation to do that. They've since pulled that back, but essentially we've been meeting the timelines for our types of applications in the city of Burlington. And so we're continuing to look for efficiencies, but we're I would say, kind of ahead of that curve at this point.
So you have a follow-up question. Go ahead.
Just one more, yeah. I mean, with regards to the province's timeline, does the city of Burlington then issue conditional approvals simply to extend the planning kind of review process when they hit that date?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's different types of applications, and I'm kind of speaking generally to it, but each application will have its own process. Some applications we don't have the ability to do that. We have to make a decision within a certain time period. An official plan amendment, as an example, we have to make a recommendation and council has to make a decision on those types of applications within 4 months. There are other types of applications like a site plan application, which allow us to add conditions to a file. So if there are outstanding issues, we can include a condition that those be resolved before they receive their final approval. So it depends on the application type, but yeah, that is something that in some cases is applicable.
I might add, there's not a lot of complexity to everything, and ranging from a deck to a 4 buildings on a single property, each of 20 stories. The degrees of complexity are very influential. Then you get into, we had the advantage of Oval Court there, where they're in a floodplain. And so we were just hearing the other day that they've been working on that application for 8 years now. And we know that the Bridgewater downtown, that was 15 years in the making. And there were a whole bunch of reasons for that. So the answer is it depends. And then you also have the pre-application stage where we actually don't have an application which we have accepted. That is true. I got that right. And some of those it's all private. It's in the hands of the applicant. And so that could be in the works for years all by itself. So when we say we've got 22,000 in pre-application, there's conversation going backwards and forwards between the applicant and the and city staff, and they're making changes as they go along. All of that is also being changed by the provincial government in terms of not allowing that, and that all that means is that it will change the nature of the relationship between the applicant and staff and the city. Then you get to the point where historically, the city has always worked with applicants, and we may have had deadlines for approving the application, but in the past, there were things that weren't working out right. And so we would continue working with the applicant until they got it right, and we were able to look at it. So I think the province has been working hard to simplify the process and incent us all to work more quickly, to get more homes, because we need them. So we're highly sensitive to your point. But making it happen, the reality of that is odd, especially given that interest rates are so high, construction costs are so high, the banks aren't essentially financing condominium buildings right now. So here we are talking about 40,000 units in the pipeline, but how many of those will actually get built in any time soon? So the gentleman here with the green shirt.
Yes, we're in Ward 5. My interest is that development at the corner of Appleby Line and Fairview. And I guess what I read from previous articles, that if all of those things come to fruition, That'll be an additional 21,000 people.
Tell you what, I'm going to ask,
The folks online can't hear the questions taking place, so we're going to try that.
I'm talking about the area close by here, Appleby Line and Fairview.
Yes.
And the bit I read about this would be if all of those projects that were on the table come to fruition, that'll increase our population, just that area, by 21,000 people. That's the size of the city of Stratford. I find that insane. If you drove here today, which you did, up Appleby Line, you can hardly get up and down it now. And there's no plans in the city to expand any roads, widen any roads, or do anything. I'm glad I'm the age I am, and most of this stuff will be passed on to somebody else. I find most of this thing. Second part is, you have numbers up there. We want to have 29,000 new dwellings by 2031. Today is, we're nearly in 2025. You're telling me that'll happen in 6 years? I don't believe a word of that. And what happens if we don't make it? Do we get excommunicated from the province? I don't think most people here want any of that stuff. I don't remember voting for it.
Well, do you want to have a go at that, or do you want me to have a go at that?
Excuse me,
Yes.
something else that really
Sorry.
irritates me.
Can I just answer the
Well, this is part of his question.
Okay.
We're having this influx of individuals to move in.
Yes.
Everyone has to have a toilet. Everyone has to have water. We have all these potential storms that we're threatened with, and floods. What is the city doing about infrastructure?
Is there more to it?
Yeah.
All right, so this three-part question. I think perhaps we can talk about the property at Fairview, the proposed property at Fairview and Appleby Line. We do not have an application for that. So what was happening there was a pre-consultation meeting with the community to kind of air the discussion. So that was a meeting organized by the owners of the property in association with staff who helped them make the meeting happen. Whether it's 21,000 or whether it's 10,000 is unknown at this moment, as far as I understand. And it is subject to change, to answer your question. With respect to that being a lot of people, it is. I just want to give you a simple statistic. Our historical absorption rate, and I'll explain that in a second, is 1,000 units a year. What that means is we have typically seen only 1,000 units being bought and sold by the developers in the last 10, 15 years. And that has a lot to do with market conditions and price of property. So anybody going to be bringing 10,000, 20,000 units onto the market is not going to be selling those very quickly and is not going to be building them very quickly. And then, of course, you go to all other sorts of factors like financing, and with respect to what I mentioned earlier, interest rates and actually capacity to build, and anybody's willingness to buy come into the market. Right now we know that developments that were able prior to COVID to be on the market and pre-selling, we've got one developer who sold 60% of its units prior to COVID. Since then has only sold 4%. They cannot get financing. So that will not be built. So that's your first question. I'm not going to speculate on how long you're going to live. I'm hoping it's for a long time. And you may have the opportunity to see something, but it won't be 10,000 or 20,000 anytime soon. With respect to your question, and is one about traffic congestion. Anybody in the room disagrees? We're all frightened about traffic congestion. I think that we have not seen enough investment in infrastructure in Ontario for the last 30 years. Anybody in their right mind knows that we are at the end of the lake and there's a bend there, right? And especially when you get the highways that kind of mix and mingle in the area of Brant Street, so the 407 and the 403, the QEW. And then you've got the bridge over the bay, and if something goes wrong with that, it's 10 times worse than it is and it's bad enough already. Recognize we were just talking about 70,000 more people coming into the city of Burlington. Forget the additional lands for a moment. In the region, when we did the regional official plan in 2021, 2022, we were anticipating 450,000 more people moving into Region Halton. So we're getting 70,000. There's another 380,000 moving into Oakville, Milton, Halton Hills in that time frame. In Hamilton, it's another 500,000 people. So I just come back to your point about traffic. We are making efforts to help make transit more convenient. I'm talking about on-demand transit. That's a complex conversation because Ontario has standards for things like what buses should look like, and I think they're a little crazy when you look at the number of people riding our buses. But in addition to that, cycling and walking, and part of the issue with more concentrated developments is that people can walk to the stores and they can get across to the GO station, but I was coming to the GO station. So what the province is investing in right now is masses of money in electrifying the rail line. And what that will do is speed up the frequency and the pace at which you get from Burlington to Toronto or elsewhere. I believe that's the first big spend. As you know, we're going to see Burl Oak close while they build the underpass. So in the course of time, what I'm going to suggest to you is I see no relief to congestion with the growth in population anytime soon. I think Metrolinx will help. But in the long run, the economy depends on having people have homes. So yes, it's going to get worse, and jobs, absolutely. Anyway, so there was the first question, the first two questions. I'm hoping that was helpful. With respect to flooding, and I appreciate who I'm talking to and your sensitivity to the matter. 1,600 people flooded in Burlington on July 15th, 16th. In comparison to 3,000 in 2024. It's a very complex problem. And if you're interested, depending on how interested you are, you can get a map of the sewage pipes for every street in the city. And what you will discover is that flooding conditions vary from home to home, from street to street, relative to the amount of the intensity of rainfall at any one point in time. And it has almost, if you look at south of the QEW, we are more at risk of getting flooding basements than you are north of the QEW and in new areas. And that is because in 1965, the building code was revised so that downspouts from roofs and weeping tiles around the house were no longer allowed to be connected to the sanitary sewer pipes. South of the QEW, essentially all those homes are connected, or have been. And what happens in a heavy rainfall prior to what we saw in July this year, or August last year, July and August 2024, and August 2014. Prior to that, the amount of rainfall we've got in a typical rainfall storm did not exceed the capacity of our sewage pipes to handle it. We did have some homes that repeatedly flooded, but the majority did not. The weather, the climate change has caused a situation where we are now desperately worried about it all. I agree with you. But it actually is, it's got to do with what we call infiltration and inflow. And that is where the water still comes off people's roofs at the rate of, in an average heavy rainfall at 2,000 liters an hour, 12 homes surcharge the pipes under the road. Because we have houses that don't stop that water from going in. So that raises questions about should we have bigger pipes? And the answer is, how much bigger do we have to keep making them? The answer is no, we actually have to fix the houses. That's a bit of a problem. Go ahead.
One other little item. We've got 44,000 potential projects to go into Burlington, all of which have to have cement bases. They cover a lot of the porous land that absorbs the water, why would we put more homes covering up the land and put the potential for flooding those others that are around it, those who've lived here for years? Why would we continue to do that sort of thing without some other plan involved to deal with that water? Have we got one?
Okay, this is really not planning talk, right? Or just planning when to talk about it. The answer to your question is that the new homes are not as much of a risk as the old homes. So a couple of things. Number one, high-rise buildings the water does not infiltrate the sanitary sewer system. So the flow coming from those buildings is much lower than a group of single-family homes south of the QEW. There is no water getting into the sanitary system from those properties. In addition to that, we've got we've designed the flow of through the system of large pipes. They're all, however, on separate systems. I mean, there's so many pipes going through the ground. They're not all connected. Just because there are 40,000 people going to the north of you doesn't mean that you will get all their flow coming into your house. It doesn't happen that way. They're all separately designed systems. So the design standards are changed as of 1965. There are very distinctly different systems. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying I'm not an engineer, but my understanding from an engineering standpoint is that there is a requirement through a new development that any of the pre-stormwater conditions, so the way the site exists in terms of the stormwater, how it's being handled before a site is developed, that exact condition has to be held after the site is developed. So there should be no additional runoff on adjacent properties after a development is completed. That's the engineering bar that has to be met to facilitate new development.
But they're still adding to the sewers, right? Like the people that are in those dwellings, regardless of storm, they're still adding wastewater.
Yeah, it goes, but they're not all going through the same pipes. They have different channels and different pathways.
So if there is a development at Appleby and Fairview, they will create a new wastewater system.
They can be connected to a primary channel that goes straight down to the processing plant. So they're not going in necessarily into ones that are already having homes
Well, I
attached.
think the concern, or one of the concerns is during these storms, people are getting backflow into the basements of wastewater. So if you're adding 21,000 people with additional wastewater, it seems intuitive to these that backflow will become worse unless you're creating a completely separate system or increasing the existing system.
Yeah, I understand the question. This is where I suggested, if you have the interest, take a look at the pipes that go through your neighborhoods. What you will find is there are very few neighborhoods or streets that have a long connection or series of other streets, sewage systems coming through. But in addition to that, something that happened this year in the flooding was we'd had 3 significant rainfalls the prior week that had saturated the land. And so what happens in those conditions is that water is infiltrating into the in-ground pipes wherever the weakness is, and we CCTV those all in 2014. But what happens is the water creeps through, and over time, the wetland, it remains saturated until it's all gone. Then on top of that, you get the massive rainfall on July the 15th and more on the 16th. The fascinating thing for me is the majority of homes that flooded in 2014 and put in backwater valves and sump pumps did not flood.
I have a lot of friends that did flood.
No, I'm not discounting that. I'm not discounting that. I'm saying, but most of them did not. The majority did not. We had 260 homes flood in Ward 5 in comparison to 1,000 in 2014.
That was also more rain that we had in 2014 in a shorter period of time.
It was over a longer period of time, but we actually had more rain intensely in 45 minutes. So the circumstances changed, but what I was going to get to, we actually had homes that had backwater valves installed in 2014 and a sump pump that flooded, got sanitary sewer in 2024, and we to this day have not yet got the analysis of why that occurred and how. there is a suggestion that they hadn't been cleaned. As we were talking to, we had some meetings with community members, and some of them had bought homes that had previously flooded. And when we asked about, well, have you been cleaning and inspecting those backwater valves, they went, what? We have not. So we are still trying to understand what went on. The information we have is those backwater valves are still functioning. So how did the sanitary sewage get past them? We don't know the answer to that yet. Okay, so.
The water came up underneath the houses. And
Okay,
it came
so-
up through the floors. That's where the water came from.
Okay, I'd like to address the question of underwater sanitary sewer getting through the cracks and all the rest of it. What I'm saying is right now we don't have the analysis of all that. A lot of those homes, they weren't reporting that, but we need to find out more.
Want the insurance company to know?
No, they have reported them. They have reported the flooding. We just haven't finished the analysis of what happened. So we have a question from online.
So we do have quite a few questions from online.
So we're going to take a few.
Down.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. In relation to proposed development around Appleby GO Station, would there be any impact of this on the houses across from the GO Station? How is this traffic situation especially going to be managed? So thank you for the presentation. In relation to the proposed development around Appleby GO Station, would there be any impact of this on the houses across from the GO Station? How is the traffic situation especially going to be managed?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. I believe the question is relating specifically to what is known as the Oval Court development. It's a Branthaven development application just east on the south side of the Appleby GO Station. There's an industrial cul-de-sac essentially that exists just east of the Appleby GO Station right now. A developer came in with a proposal for a number of tall buildings, a mixed-use development in that area. That was one of the ones Councillor Sharman referenced. Approximately 8 years ago, they started the process, so it's been under review for quite some time. It went to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and there was a decision made at the Ontario Land Tribunal to approve that development. But as part of that process, one of the things the city required was that the traffic in that area be evaluated. So the applicants would have submitted a traffic impact study that would be available on the project webpage, which is still live if anyone wants to refer to that. But that would essentially set out what the impacts would be, what the magnitude of the impacts relating from that development on the surrounding transportation network would be. That was assessed by our transportation department and ultimately was accepted. There are improvements that need to be made to the area to facilitate that development, turning lanes, light signals, other forms of transportation, cycling and walking that all need to be incorporated. So all of those measures were incorporated as part of their plan, reviewed by the city and accepted by the province.
Sorry.
First, you said it was approved, but now it's back to pre-approved. And now it was,
Sorry.
So when it first came out, it was a very detailed application, and we had the pre-consult, and then we have the one after. But since it's been pre-approved, it's super vague, just 7 main areas, and there are no scheduled pre-consults or anything. So I'm really confused. I think most of us in the 5110 and 5090 Fairview area is confused about what's going on with it and what's actually going to be built there now that it's super vague and just saying that there's seven areas of development.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and hopefully I can shed a little bit of light into how this has transpired. So the first step for the applicants was to establish their land use permissions. So they had to amend the official plan of the city. They also needed to amend the zoning bylaw, which allows for that development to occur. So as part of that process, that's when we would have had public engagement previously. We would have had a number of public meetings where we were taking feedback. I believe there was a statutory public meeting, so we brought the proposal to council for their review. No decisions were made at that time. The applicants appealed the lack of decision that the city made, or did not make, I should say, to the Ontario Land Tribunal. they approved the development in principle. So that has established the permission for that development to proceed. Now the applicants are working through subsequent application processes. So they're actually creating lots to facilitate this development. So that's a subdivision application that has just recently been submitted. So if you're tracking that, you would have seen that application just came in over the last number of weeks. They've also submitted what's known as a site plan application, and that's where we review the details of their proposal. So the architectural design, the access to the buildings, lighting, landscaping, traffic, all of those detailed components are now being reviewed. That process under the Ontario Planning Act is not necessarily a public process, so there isn't the requirement for the municipality to circulate those plans for public feedback. However, that doesn't stop anyone that's interested from participating and understanding what's going on. So if you want to get in touch with myself, I can put you in touch with the planner on the file who can share those details, or Councillor Sharman can also share the details of that site plan application as well.
So I'll just add, can you hear me okay through the system here? Good. I might just add that that was a surprise to me that we publicized that we had the site plan process. It is not typical. The application will be, my expectation and belief is, it will be the same as that was approved earlier in the zoning bylaw amendment and the official plan amendment. I just think they're going now into the details of how many units, what size are they, where the doors, the sort of things that Kyle said. I don't know. We haven't talked about a public meeting on this. We're not expecting one. I was surprised we publicized it even.
To answer that question, we actually will have to bring a report to council on the subdivision to actually create the lots that they want to proceed to implement this proposal. So that will be coming to council later this year. I think we're looking at November. So that is a public meeting where people can delegate and present their feedback to council. But to the councilor's point, it's really an implementation piece. They're implementing the approvals that the province already granted.
Okay, so we'll take another one and then we're going back to the folks online.
Right, sorry. So just to follow up on this and to clarify something for me, I'm not so personally interested in where the doors are in the units and the buildings and the lighting in the oval court, but what we're interested is beyond their property line and the impacts that they have down the street, right? So where are the plans for that? Because those public right of way, like if there's a road widening on the street as part of this report, right? Is the developer going to be in charge of planning and organizing and working on that, or is that somebody else? And I think really that's kind of where the interest is. That's where we keep asking for sewers, and like if you're connecting all the sewers within like the 5 or 7 or whatever many buildings, it doesn't really matter so much. It's more like, down the impact to actually the community, right? Like it's the schools for these people, the jobs for these people, the parking, the shops. So that's where the interest is.
Sure, I think we can answer those questions. I'm going to ask you to do it back. Go ahead.
Yeah, so again, what the province has done is they've approved this development in principle, and now what we're doing is getting into the detailed design. So we're understanding now what improvements need to be made to actually facilitate this development. So if there are works that need to be done in the municipal right-of-way, they have to then work with our transportation department, get the necessary approvals to undertake those works. Councillor Sharman mentioned how there's Appleby Creek just on the left side of this development. They're going to have to do works to Appleby Creek to ensure that the site does not have any flooding implications. So they have to work with the Conservation Authority, get those approvals in the city. So that's the level of detail that we're now at, is figuring out how is this thing actually going to function and what approvals are needed to facilitate those. So the developer would work with the city, obtain the approvals, and then we decide, how that work is actually going to be completed. And if there are situations where there are works that need to be done that have impacts on adjacent residents, then we work with our engineering team to ensure that residents are notified of that. If there's any road works, as an example, all of that would be communicated outwards.
Kyle mentioned that there will be a report coming to committee and council, and as soon as we have that, we will let you know through my newsletter or through a special news update. And if you're not on my newsletter list, please talk to Brianne, and she'll be happy to sign you up. Because we recognize that there's an interest, and we just need to find a way to get to everybody. So our newsletter update is the best way we can do that. Thank you very much for your questions. Do we have, okay, so I want to get after online. Thank you.
Last one regarding the Oval Court. Notification is one thing. It seems like maybe a one-way form of communication. Does anybody on Fairview at that point have input? Like this kind of technical discussion that you were having kind of behind doors at the city, is that put out for public opinion at some point? Or do we have input on what happens there? Or is it simply that we might get notified through a letter at some point that this is happening? That's it.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The way that the Ontario government has structured the Planning Act is that the opportunity for public participation is when we're establishing land use permissions. So that stage of the process has already occurred. We consulted with the public. The province made a decision on this application, so they've approved the development. Now we're into the site plan, the detailed design stage. And there isn't a requirement for either the city or applicants to engage with the public. Not to say that we can't, but it's not a requirement. So generally, the level of detail that we're at that stage, with the professionals in the various disciplines reviewing those technical plans, that's generally not something that we engage with the public on, because it is, like I say, very technical exercise at that point.
Will we be publishing the reports on the web page? So traffic studies, things like that. So firstly, you can see the reports. And secondly, when the report comes to council, you can delegate. So we have a two-stage process at that point. We have a committee meeting, and then there's a council meeting. And it's not clear to me, we don't know yet what decisions we'll be asked to make in that process, but you can delegate at both meetings. Okay, and they can send you emails as well and letters.
Absolutely, yeah. We, again, I'll put a plug in for our development pages. Burlington.ca/Oval Court would be the project webpage for that development in particular. And so you can find the planner's contact information. You can send them letters directly. We're collecting that feedback, and that will all be included within the report that we bring to council later this year.
And you can sign up for the updates on that page, so you don't even need our newsletter. But we'll send it to you anyway. Okay, we're going to go to online.
Excellent. So is the public school board aware of upcoming development? What are the specific plans for high schools, especially in light of the Bateman closure? Currently, there are no public high schools in the ward, and with the projected growth, what steps are being taken? Additionally, what communication has taken place between the city and the school board regarding these issues and future development?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Maybe I'd approach it from two different perspectives. One being the policy perspective. So as we're planning for future growth in the city at a high level, the school boards are involved in that process. They're circulated that information, and they have the opportunity to provide us with feedback about, how we're growing, where we're growing, the intensity at which we're growing at. And then the second part of my response would be for each development application or proposal that comes forward to the city, we circulate that to the school board. They review that information, and then they provide us comments or conditions, if applicable, for how they would like to see students within that development, how they would like them to be accommodated within the board. So we circulate all of the school boards as part of every development application that we receive.
If I can just leap in there, I'm going to ask Alison a question then. So with respect to the Bronte Creek Meadows, in particular, because it's local, as we work with the owners on how that land will be used, will we be engaged in the possibility of putting a school on that property?
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. And they are already engaged at the very high visioning level, and all agencies, Conservation Authority, school boards, ministries of the provincial government, including Bronte Creek Provincial Park. So it's a provincial park right next door. So certainly all of those agencies become part of that conversation. And you know, if you think about a typical area-specific plan, or think about Alton, where you have blocks dedicated for parkland, where you have blocks dedicated for schools, I think you can expect that that will kind of be the nature of how we move forward there in Bronning Creek Meadows.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison. Thank you, Kyle. We have another question online, please, and I'll come back to Jim.
So if the pipeline to permit project in the right-hand corner states that there are 44,000 housing units in the pipeline, and Burlington's target is 29,000 housing units by 2031, do we not have an oversupply? Given the condo projects in Toronto and surrounding communities, many of which are now selling at less than cost, what impacts does this have for the city of Burlington?
So maybe you want me to have a go at that one? I just come back to the earlier comment I made about the current market for condominiums. There's something that hasn't been said yet today, and that is, in the official plan, the calculation of the 71,000 units that would be built between now and 2051 is as follows: 6% low rise, low density, so single-family homes and ground-oriented housing, 12% mid-rise, and 82% high-rise. So right now, nobody's building high-rise buildings. Right. So I was thinking about your question about the mathematics. Can we get to 29,000? So originally when it came out, we had about 10 years to do 29,000. Now it's coming down to 7 years, right? And as we divide the number remaining, 29,000 minus, what, 2,000, right? Not a lot. That means we now have to get 5,000 a year at the moment to be built. And so anybody's guess is as good as mine, but I'm not betting on it right now with respect to the 29,000. The 44,000 is highly, in terms of when those will take place, and then the question if they will take place. 22,000 of them are pre-application. We may not see anything on those for many years yet to come. So I think in general, the economy has to change. We have to see the market change. We have to see the capacity of the developers even change, because right now they can't. The capacity is very low for development. So all bets are off right now. I'm going to go to Jim next.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for having the meeting. We need more of these meetings for the people to talk to everybody and have a dialogue. I have 2 points. We need more low-cost housing, and the idea of the fourplex is a really good idea. But I'm concerned that if you have a lot with a 1,000 or 1,200 square foot house, and you build another place with 4,000 square feet, the first house maybe had 1 or 2 cars. If you have 4 units, you're going to have 4 to 8 cars. You're going to have a lot less land there to absorb water. And I just think that we haven't thought this really out well enough on how we're going to handle wastewater and stormwater with the fourplexes on what were single-family lots.
Alison's got the answer.
Oh, I haven't got the answer, but I do know that we're having that conversation now. And I think that is really what council expects us to do with that direction. Council has said, tell us, go and talk to the community first, and then tell us what standards look like to comfortably accommodate those extra units. And I think all of those factors come into play. Parking, I think we need to think a bit creatively about too. If we're seeing, if we can find a way to tie it more, those new units to places where there's more mobility. No, you're saying no. Transit, where you've got transit lines and that sort of thing.
Anyway, and I was going to add that because you're going to have transportation for these people as well.
But sorry, let me interrupt for a second, because I think there's a matter of how big these units can be.
So there will definitely be an element of that, but in the way we thought about additional residential units before, it was really like that unit is smaller than or subordinate to. There's still a subordinate relationship, but I think we're still playing around with what the standards might look like. That's how you get to affordability too. just by sheer size. If your unit is smaller, the square footage is smaller, it's cheaper to build, and that's how you build in a little bit of a gradation rather than simply all single detached dwellings or all tall buildings. So it will be an evolution, and this is our first step towards that. And
So you still have work to do.
absolutely, and we need your input. And I'll just make a pitch. We will be at the Appleby Street Festival this weekend, so you can give us your feedback on increasing housing options there, as well as Bronny Creek Meadows.
See, we just got a free promotion of the Appleby Line Street Festival on Sunday. So the 70 people are online. Please join us. Go ahead, finish.
The more important part, though, which really is the big concern to me, is I'm all for the big developments at the GO stations. I think it's a brilliant idea. But those people have to work. It's nice to have a place to live, but it's more important that you have a place to work and you have a way of getting there. And it seems to me with taking away employment lands for housing, you're going in the wrong direction. And I don't think you have really figured out where you're going to get people from these big developments to a place of employment. Great for the ones who are going into downtown Toronto for employment, but I don't think everybody wants to take the GO station into Toronto. So I've seen nothing from any of the people on how people are going to get to work from these new developments.
So you got the right person here to answer that question also. It's a policy matter that's being developed by Anderson.
Yeah, and certainly, and I think I've mentioned this at other meetings, and I didn't really spend a lot of time on it today, but the province is also shifting how they look at employment area. And I think that all comes along with the shift of more hybrid work, vacant offices. We have so many dynamics at play in terms of where people are going to work and how to connect them to where they live, to where they work. It's all going to be a little bit of will be in a little bit of tumult, and that's why it's really good to think about the MTSAs as also a place that's really critical for office jobs, for other kinds of community services to be embedded right there where people live. So that's a really big thrust of the MTSAs, is to require those kinds of uses on the first and second stories of those developments, so that in a subtle way we're getting at it. I think there's a bigger problem in the longer term about how do we accommodate offices, how do we attract offices to those key areas. That's going to be our long-term play, where we really need to up our game as we go along.
So I just want to add to that,
You've
Jim.
got to deal
Hang
with...
on, Jim. Just a second. I want to add to that in the end, the developer is applying market force pressure, responding to market force pressures as to what they will apply for. And at the same time, the planning staff get to review that and look for changes relative to the pressures that we see in the city. So this is not a one and done. We're not looking at a static plan. We're looking at one that has to respond to market forces. We have been under a lot of pressure for MTSA lands over the last 5 years, where the developers said, no, we'll give you 2% commercial and the rest will be all residential. And we've been saying, no, we're not doing that. So I think, to your point, yes, we have that concern, and it's an evolving thought process, but sorry to interrupt.
But there's lots of jobs you can't do that. Carpenters, plumbers, electricians, welders. I really don't think you have put enough thought into this, where people are going to work.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ted's next, and then we'll go back online.
Well, Jim sort of asked my question, because I know in Oval Court, it was changed from industrial or light industrial use to something else. You've identified tonight, Allison, several more areas in the city that, hey, and I don't know really what sort of stimulated that, or we're going to lose potential areas of employment. And at the meeting at Almea, I think I asked the mayor, where people were going to work, and she suggested she had been told, she's not here to defend this, that folks were going to get on the GO train. And you know, my comment then and my comment is now that what Burlington should be doing is attracting people to come into this area to create jobs. You know, whether it's 21,000 units at Fairview or 6,500 units at Oval Court, many, whether they'll be built, but you could probably characterize them, the developers 65, 70% small units. I mean, there's just no chance. There's just not enough Tim Hortons around to support the numbers of people, quite frankly, who, hey, we're either going to mandate that they take mass transit or they're going to walk or cycle to something or work out of their 600 square foot box. Now,
right, so if you could just allow to talk about that for a minute. The employment land requirement was 50 jobs per hectare, only 50 jobs per hectare. Yeah. The mixed use, we're seeing more than 50 jobs per hectare on the same sites. So the question is, are we trading no jobs, some jobs for no jobs? That is not the case, but maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
The only thing, and it's just an elaboration on that point, is just like we think about accommodating people differently, we need to think differently about accommodating jobs. And the market, all of the other factors and the externalities are against us, but what we need to do is set a framework that says, here's how we do it in a way that doesn't rely on expansive, big swaths of land, and we try and keep all the land that we have now.
So historically, if one studies large cities around the world, with all due respect to everyone that wants to maintain and keep the grain belt, I think you do know that most of these large developments have not been created, hey, without expanding out from the center. So it's very difficult, I'm not a conspiracist, but for me to not believe, hey, that this is the, what do they call it, the 5-minute city or the 10-minute city that, is being foisted upon Canadian society. I mean, Jim makes a point. Second time in a 45-year career on a nickel project I'm working on, you know, the trades shortage in this country is extreme. If whether it be nuclear projects, industrial projects, residential projects, there are not sufficient people to build anything here. So, and the numbers of older tradespeople that are retiring, just like doctors that, you know, it's
like everything, to your point.
Well,
everything.
but the point is, like this, you're not planning. I don't believe these plans make any sense. Just bring in more people. Hey, to what? Prop up the GDP, you know, increase the mortgage, the CHMC to 1.5 million. We're bankrolling I'm getting off topic.
Yeah, well, actually, like a question, not a statement.
But seriously, Paul, like, we need, the jobs we need are not all behind a desk in an office, you know, service-type jobs. They need to be wealth-creating.
All understood. The thing is, to what degree are we as local government and federal government able to plan that and ensure it happens? We don't even know who's coming to Canada and what types of jobs we need and who's going to be paying what. We haven't got that information in front of us. I agree. It's not that it's not being planned. I just think that there is an evolution. We could have been planning for population growth and immigration for the last 30 years, and that was not done in Canada. And yet we could see for the last 30 years that aging population was going to cause the crisis we're in now. So there has not been typically a future view beyond the end of our noses.
Well, no, there's 4-year terms, and
correct.
That's what
So that's a whole other matter.
But you know, if you go to a city like Phoenix, which I go to occasionally, hey, you'll see huge pre-construction of roads. Hey, they're planning 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and other US-based cities. But in this country, we can't seem to plan beyond 6 months.
So Ted, I'm going to ask you, let us go back to questions online, please. Thank you. Right behind you. Thank you for the comments.
So this person says, I have a lot of questions and comments, but I'll try to keep it limited. Thank you for the information and for your time. I'm personally not interested in improving or speeding up the process for development, as it doesn't benefit me in any way and it doesn't lower my taxes. Words are missing from the presentations are increased traffic, taxation, and our inferior sewer and stormwater systems and schooling. I understand that the city and region have to take direction from the provincial and federal governments with intensification. Folks like me often feel like we do not have a voice and no one actually cares about our quality of life. Here's a question. What can I do to make my voice heard more clearly? Is the provincial government the best avenue? I am also someone who flooded on July 15th after having a major flood 10 years prior. I took every precaution I was advised to, and it still did not matter.
Let me have a go at that. In the first instance, the question of benefit to the community members, existing community members, and how those pieces work. I know there's a lot of attention to budget, and we're going to have a Ward 5 budget meeting next week, so if anybody's interested in learning more about taxation, come to that, but I'll talk about it just in a moment. The issue with respect to flooding, and I'm deeply sympathetic to anybody, and this gentleman or lady who flooded. I know it's a nightmare. I mean, I went through it with everybody in 2014, and we went through it again in July. And we know that it's a tragedy for those who flooded. And even if it's only a small amount of flooding, it's very disruptive. But for others, it's life-changing. The fact of the matter is, most of that flooding, a lot of that flooding, I can only talk to Ward 5, occurred south of the QEW in the older houses. And the issue is our housings, in the context of the sewage system, are designed actually not to handle the amount of rainfall we had in that period. The newer homes, they didn't flood, right? We didn't have that experience to the same degree. I mean, almost none. There is infrastructure that was old. It's different. It's what we call legal non-conforming, right? And what that means is when that house was built, it was built to the planning code at the time. And it's still built according to that planning code, even though the planning code's been updated. And we do not have a system to require homeowners to rebuild their homes to make them meet the current planning code. So that's a bit of an issue. The other thing I want to point out is that the city of Burlington basically stopped growing in 2015. And the reason for that was that we ran out of what we call greenfield land. Essentially, there were a couple of properties where there was some greenfield land, and that is still trying to be built on. But essentially what happened was the large developments that we've seen from the 60s through to 2015 ceased to happen in 2015. And since then, what we've been dealing with is only what we call infill. They could be tall buildings, so we've seen a few going up, but nevertheless, what we're doing is basically infill. The change that occurred starting about that time was planning for building around the major transit station areas. Hence, and we've talked about that a lot, frankly. In addition, the thing that changed in 2022 was the province gave us this extra 700 acres, about that, and those properties that Alison spoke of. The reason I'm mentioning this is because when you stop growing and you stop building, then taxes go up, right? Because you have no new homes coming in that are paying more taxes. So part of our issue with the city of Burlington is that we have no assessment growth, which is assessment growth is the term we use for the additional taxes coming from the new houses that people are moving into. So the dynamics around taxation and building are actually very direct. We clearly understand them. But I'm an accountant. I grew up in businesses. I understand accounting and finance relatively well. But the city and municipal accounting is different. So we don't have revenue per se in quite the same way. The best you get, the closer you get to it is grants from other levels of government. But also on top of that, assessment growth. those are the big influences. Other than that, we get property taxes, and that's collected from having to operate the city. I'm sure I'll get more questions, but I'm going to wait till next week. I'm not sure if I answered the question adequately, but I'd love to talk to this person more.
Any more questions in the room before I take another one?
Oh, gosh. Give me a microphone. Hi.
Hi.
I, unlike this gentleman, moved my family into Elizabeth Gardens, and we intend to be here for many, many years.
Good.
We just built a house in 2020 in Elizabeth Gardens. Can you give us, because there's been a lot of like policy and this and that, and you said the Appleby and Fairview thing is probably not going to happen for years to come.
Right.
I have little kids, so can you give us like a general idea, everything from like Lakeside Plaza up to Appleby and Fairview, like what is coming, just so I can imagine quality of life 10 years from now when my kids get their driver's license, you know, like that sort of thing, because they're not biking. I'll tell you, like we need cars, we have 2 vehicles. We're not going to be biking our family around the city. So can you give us sort of an idea, just so that I can imagine, like what is coming?
Who wants to do that? I could do it.
Maybe I'll take a stab at it. I think the reality, and Councillor Sharman mentioned this too, is that the development process does take some time. So new proposals that we're made aware of now at the very infancy of the proposal, they generally take years to actually be realized. I think if we look back historically, a new tall building as an example, from the day that it is presented to the city to the time that it's completed construction, generally is 5 to 8 years. So if we continue that trend moving forward, you can kind of, the developments that we're talking about now, you're projecting out a number of years. So kind of what we have in the pipeline, and again, that pie graph that we had, the closer a development gets to the building permit, the more certainty that there is that will actually proceed. So the 22,000 pre-consultations, there's the potential that many of those, as Councillor Sharman has indicated, may not actually come to fruition for whatever reason. So I guess keeping track of the information that we have available is a good way to get some insight into how things are changing, how developments are advancing their approvals, and then ultimately considering, construction of a tall building, again, takes, a couple of years to actually occur before it is realized. I think the reality is a lot of the large-scale developments, especially Appleby and Fairview, like that one, that's probably a project that we're talking 10, 15, 20 years to actually be fully realized if it were to obtain approvals in its current state, which is still something we don't know because we don't actually have that application in hand at this point. So hopefully that provides some insight in terms of the timelines.
So question for you, of the 44,000, what proportion are high density? High rise?
Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe it would be helpful if, can we pull that slide up, Richard, the piling to permit dashboard slide? The short answer is the vast majority are high density developments. Probably north of 90% are within a tall building form or a mid-rise building form. So in the bottom right corner, you can see the breakdown. So what you see at the left there, that would be apartments that are greater than 10 units. The vast majority, probably about 90%, I would say, are within that category. And then we have less that are within the next category to the right, singles and semis, row homes, additional residential units, and again, another singles and semis category. So.
Like, I also am a realtor. You can't sell a condo right now. Like, I have one listed downtown Burlington. Who's going to live in those condos? Like, if we're putting, is there research behind that? Like, I'm very confused as to, we have a community where Burlington is very family oriented, and it is why we came to Burlington and why many people come to Burlington, because they want to raise their kids here. And I know we have spots for parks and we have a beautiful downtown, but like, what are we basing 90% of our new units, who's going to live there?
So if you allow me, we are not making that choice.
Okay.
the developers, the applicants, the landowners are making that choice. Part of it is that the planning, I mentioned 82% high density, 12% mid-rise, 6% low-rise. That has got to do with the public pressure to avoid developing farmland and to avoid, what do we call it? No, well, not so much greenbelt, but more spreads. You know, so what there is a very deliberate planning direction from the province that you will increase density. So I think for Burlington, it's what, 50% or 52% densification.
There was, we're shifting into a new time now too with a whole new framework. So there was previously a target that we would.
Oh, it's changing.
The new PPS 2024 doesn't have such a target. It has a target for when you're developing new areas, but I think it's
All right.
it's
So
quite changed. Yeah.
So I think back to then, thank you for that. That's helpful because it means the province is also getting more realistic. So to answer your question, you are a real estate agent and you understand market forces. The implication is that these people who own these properties, they are planning a certain mental model, a financial model, based on the cost of the land and construction in order to make a profit. Right? Sorry?
So they're making the profit immediately.
No.
Well, no, they do. Like, so we live in those developments right across on Fairview. And we're now, our houses are getting to be 20 years old. And now we're starting to deal with, our repairing our roads and repairing our sewers and repairing all of that stuff within the condominium. And the developer sold those houses and made their profit and walked away for that 20 years ago.
Right.
And now, the kind of confusion or things that were not thought out or things that were made difficult because, we're close together or we're sharing things or things are not defined, they don't have to deal with anymore, right? So I'm sorry, but we're holding you to a higher standard because you have to think long term, right? Like the developer's not thinking 25 years into the future. They're thinking 5, maybe 8, whatever. So, at that point.
No, I understand. That's why I responded no. The reason I said no is because those units will not be built. Those 44,000 units will not be built in the next 5 years. We do not have the ability to do that. They cannot build them because they can't get financing. The market is not there. My point is that the market forces are influencing what is being proposed on top of government policy. To your point, it's inconsistent with what most of people in Burlington would want because we all chose to live in smaller or land-oriented, ground-oriented housing, right? I was at a meeting with Nick Nannis the other day that in Halton, 74% of homeowners live in single-family homes. And when asked the question, where would you like to live in the future? 74% said single-family homes. And when asked how many of you would like to live in condominiums, 2% said they would. You are absolutely correct. There are big factors, economic factors at play. And as what Alison's just said, is they're kind of bobbing and weaving a bit because what they told us 2 years ago or 3 years ago was we must have 82% of our developments being tall. The city has got to comply with that regulation. We have to permit it. Is that right?
So the growth plan gave us an intensification target in our built-up area.
Right.
And also gave us targets in our MTSAs. Those targets remain even in the changed planning framework around the MTSAs. We still are held to a really high standard there. But I think there's a little bit of a softening in when we're looking at new places, new greenfield areas, like Brownie Creek Meadows is a good example.
Yep. Thank you. Have we got any more online?
Yes, we do. So we're going to go back to floods and high-rise. So, hello. If the high-rise does not infiltrate into the same system, can you please explain to us where does it go /exits? I'm going to combine it with another question as well, because for time. Water from condo buildings, do get discharged If not into the city pipes, then waterways nearby. Typically, most buildings are required to be able to accommodate a 100-year storm, which can then be discharged into city infrastructure. Will a city raise a requirement for these storage tanks to allow for more storage of water and allow for discharge over a longer time?
There are two types of water. There's sewage water, sanitary sewage water, and there's storm water. So I think that question addressed both. So with respect to sanitary sewers, you've got mainline pipes, huge, I can't even think of the right term, big pipes. The main trunks. So high density buildings are going to probably closer or have direct feeds into those main trunk pipes. That makes sense? Not into the road system that all of our single family homes are utilizing. So the answer to the question is the large buildings will go into sewage pipes owned by the region, and they are designed, the connection is geared precisely to an 80% utilization factor of those pipes relative to the amount required for the size of the building. Okay, so that is all engineered. It's not subject to guessing. The new buildings aren't subject to infiltration and inflow in the same way that the older properties are. So the mathematics has changed because of climate change for older buildings. So when it comes to overland water or storm water, yes, we have stormwater ponds. Now in the newer developments, we're looking for tanks, right? So do we know anything about that?
Yeah, exactly that. So I mentioned earlier that when a development comes forward, they have to manage every drop of water that falls on that site. And the condition that existed before the development occurred has to exist afterwards. And so sometimes what that means, if they're introducing new impervious surface, roofs, parking lots, the water can't get into the ground, and so they have to capture all that stormwater on site. And the question is driving at storage tanks. How large do the storage tanks need to be? And then how quickly do they then, after a rain event, outlet into the waterways, the creeks, et cetera, that exist around that. So all of that is taken into account by our engineers as part of a development application. And until they demonstrate that the post flows meet the pre, that development is not allowed to proceed. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you. Another question from online.
Please. Will any consideration be made to increase the requirements for these developments to have a 1-to-1 ratio of unit to parking space instead of an industry standard of 85% parking spaces to units?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the MTSAs and go back to the idea that the reason intensification in those areas is desirable is because you have access not only to local transit routes, but you've also got access to the GO train to get into Toronto or to get anywhere else along the network. So in those areas, we actually are taking kind of a very radical approach from a parking perspective, which could have a couple of benefits, and it's something we'll be monitoring really closely. So one of the benefits is if you're not driving, a space for every unit, you don't have an additional car on the road necessarily. If we're looking at different options there, because you're situated in probably the best way in Burlington, I think we all acknowledge Burlington is a suburban community, and the car will still be very important for many of the things that we need to do in our day-to-day lives. But in those MTSAs, we can start to embed things where you can go and get milk by walking to the store. You don't have to get into your car. So we are taking kind of a radical approach in the MTSAs, looking at parking quite differently, and along the corridors as well. That's tied to our Housing Accelerator Fund funding that the city got to support building more housing. So in that case, we're running a pilot currently to say there are no requirements for parking for residential developments along some of our key corridors. So that's something we'll be monitoring very closely. Is there any uptake? Will the market even consider that sort of thing? And that will be really important information as the zoning bylaw gets reviewed, and I won't speak to that specifically.
So,
Pardon me?
to that point, Ted, thank you. There is a development that we went to visit recently. It's called Downtown Markham. So it's just off the 407, I think, about 160 acres. And it is completely mixed use. And so they have the jobs, stores, companies are completely intermingled with housing. The design of it is such that people can walk to work, they can walk to the store, everything that they want is available. Just happening to have an architect in the office the other day, he said, I haven't owned a car for 25 years, and he has kids. And he said, we don't use the car, we'll catch the bus, we'll use the bike, we'll get Uber, or whatever. But we've got used to that. We don't live downtown Toronto, right? But downtown Toronto has the kind of density that we might have in certain areas like downtown Markham or around the GO stations. So the question is not so much, is it going to always be the same here? The answer, or are we just going to keep on having what we always have? The answer is we're not going to have what we have now in general. And indeed, if you think about your own single-family homes, where you may have a larger lot at a quarter of an acre in Elizabeth Gardens, and the land by itself is worth $1 million. Did I get that about right?
Yeah, totally.
Right? So the fact is, today, my youngest daughter, she got an entry-level home, $330,000, and she was lucky enough to be able to pre-buy it 2.5 years before she moved in. By the time she moved in, it was then worth $500,000, and then 5 years later, when we moved out, she's now worth $700,000 or $750,000. She was a young woman, she didn't have kids at the time. A lot of people who are in the age group that she was when she bought cannot even begin to do what she did, because the house she got for $330,000 is now $700,000, right? And our income has not increased that much, right? So the dynamics then, and the reason I mentioned this, is that it's not surprising that we're thinking about putting 4 units, making it possible to put 4 units on a single-family home lot today, because divide that by 4, it's $250,000 for a piece of land. There's a quarter of what you have in your lot right now. Is that something you or I want? No. But one of your kids or grandchildren might be delighted to have that, right? Unless you give them the property. So the issue is economics, and it is a fact of life. And we are living the change right now. It's not like we can't see it. It's clearly visible. We know that our children and grandchildren cannot afford what we have for the most part, right? So we have to act, to Ted's point. We have to act.
I'm going to build that quadplex, and then I'm going to go and get bring offers. Okay? You can walk to the Appleby GO station. I will have no interest in renting it out. Bring a slum landlord from Toronto, and I'll build that model all around.
I may hold you to this, but I'll check on you in 5 years' time. I'm going to ask a question. Does anybody have any more questions? All right. Yes, go ahead.
Comparisons to Toronto make me a bit nervous that we have the worst traffic in Toronto in all of North America.
We have a terrible situation with traffic. I agree with you.
Just when you specifically compare us to Toronto, that worries me.
You know what? We had a conversation with Carolyn Mulrooney at the Association of Municipals, AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, summer of last year, and that was the question we were asking. We were asking the Minister of Transportation, Carolyn Mulrooney, and her staff were right there, and we said, how is it that you are not investing in redesigning the intersection in Burlington and putting a new way of getting across the bay in there? And the answer is, we don't understand your question. We've done all the traffic modeling, and there is capacity on the roads. Oh, well, do you know that every time the sewer gets blocked, the stuff flows into our roads, and it's all over the floor? And they thought that was kind of inappropriate. But seriously, that's the way it is, right? We get a little thing happen on the highway, and suddenly, because the province hasn't provided sufficient capacity and haven't resolved the bottleneck, we have cars everywhere, and we have a nightmare today. So now add another 1 million people, Hamilton and Halton. this is going to be a nightmare. I agree. Yes, go ahead, Jim.
That point, Paul, at Lakeshore and Brant, you allowed patios to come out and take a lane away all summer.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest bottlenecks, and there's absolutely no reason to do that. So I would hope that next year, I'm for patios. I think it's great for the downtown area. But that's a major artery, and you put a bottleneck there all by yourself.
Not personally, but did you want to address that, Jamie? Microphone, please. I've been itching to give you an opportunity to mention something.
I don't need this one. Kyle and Allison have been doing such a great job. I really haven't had
Well, I
to
just wanted to
speak,
get you up here. It was
But
looking
I
for
do
an
appreciate
opportunity.
that. And so your comment is a good one. Yeah, thank you. Your comment's a good one, and it's not the first time we've heard that. And that's an ongoing, there's push and pull. So we have our transportation department who's actively paying attention to traffic flows along Lakeshore. We have downtown businesses in the downtown business improvement area who are asking for these patios and wanting to do it. And it's a question of right-sizing it. So you're right, off of Lakeshore, I think the patio program's working quite well. But when you get on those through streets, that's where it gets tricky. And you will actually see a report, I believe in the December cycle of committee, where we're doing an analysis of how did the patio program work this year. Any observations on traffic and bottlenecks and all of those things. So we're thinking about it, and we're going to have that conversation with council at the end of this year. So your comment is a good one, and we've heard it, and we're going to report on that.
They do kind of sit at them. People do sit at them. But let me just throw this out, just to be playing devil's advocate. We actually don't want all that traffic cut off from the highway to be going through downtown. So putting in constrained traffic means that they're not going to want to be there. What we do know is that if they'd stayed on the highway, they would actually get home quicker than if they cut through our streets. So it's a very interesting
It's not the cut through people, Paul, it's me.
Well, yeah, but you're caught up in the cut-through people.
No, that's minor. That has nothing to do with it.
All right, I understand. I don't like making a right turn onto, what is it, Elgin or Jane, right? And there's the barriers right there. I'm going to call this almost an end here because it's now almost 8 o'clock. I fully understand your concern, and to some degree I'm empathetic. Did anybody have any last questions here this evening?
Do developments communicate with each other? So when something like Oval Court, which we can't even really comment on anymore, so we need to talk about these things ahead of time. Like I pretty consistently hear these things take 8 or 10 or 15 years, but we learned from Oval Court at some point it's done. Like we can't talk about it anymore. There's no real public consultation. So I think it's important that
It's done now.
right, it's done.
There's
So
no more public control. We aren't able to affect any decisions from this point.
So, sorry, just
Right.
let's get the question, because I think that there's an interpretation that we need to help with
So
here.
that's really a comment that I think it's important that we talk about these things, and not so much, it's okay, it'll take 15 years, but we need to talk about it now, because at some point we're going to get cut off. But what I really want to ask is, something like Oval Court, where they anticipate, is it 6,500 units?
It's about 2,000 people.
Sorry, 2,000 people?
Units, 2,000 units.
2,000 units, so maybe
Yeah.
6,500 people or so. So if there's a traffic feasibility study done with that, is that considered by other developments? For example, the one that is on Fairview and Appleby. If they do a traffic feasibility, are they considering all the traffic that will be added by the other developments that are already in?
Yeah, we have the answer for you.
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is yes, they are considered. So as part of any traffic impact study, they have to look at the current conditions, but they also have to look at proposed conditions. So the requirement for them basically is to look at all the developments that we also have in the pipeline, assess worst case scenario, plug their development in that, and demonstrate that they are addressing those conditions appropriately as well. So it is looking at both the current as well as the future conditions, and developers are most definitely required to ensure that collectively all of their developments are being assessed together.
So with respect to Oval Court, the reports will be filed. They'll be on the website. You can read them, and you can send us emails about it. You can copy me and send it to the staff.
But we can't affect them.
Well, you don't. By your comments will be taken into consideration. We tend to answer in the report what the comments were and the questions were, and whether or not they should be and can be addressed. So yes.
For that November, does that mean it's like a go time for them? Like, just when talking about timelines earlier, then what would the timeline be after that November report?
Yeah, so just to be clear, that report in November is the subdivision report. So that this development, it's 8 different mixed-use buildings, and so each mixed-use building will be on its own lot. And so the application that we're processing right now is establishing that lotting pattern. It's also increasing the size of Oval Court, the right-of-way that exists there right now, making that a little bit larger. So it doesn't really deal with all of the specific details of the development. It's more so how is the lotting pattern gonna be implemented. So after we get a decision on that, they still have to work through the detailed design process.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, and from the gentleman over here, please.
I guess just as a final.
Just a second. Let's get the microphone. We want to hear your beautiful voice.
Given all the time you guys put into this, and given all the input, I guess, from the public and the percentage that you were saying about, people in this area wanting to live, 74% wanting to live in single-family homes.
Yeah.
As planners for the city of Burlington, with regard to the identity of Burlington, is it that you guys have a vision for Burlington that you're simply trying to fit these things in, or are we always going to be playing catch-up with the rules that are coming from up top, to then recreate the identity of Burlington? Like, what is, for you, from your point of view, the identity of Burlington that we as a public can buy into? Because if it is just, 600 square foot tower apartments and towers that we're looking forward to, and the comparison to Toronto, is that really the Burlington that we bought into when we moved in here, that trusted you as the planners and the city to kind of maintain or keep or grow? What is your kind of point of view?
But I think the answer is really clear, and I'm going to let Anderson talk to you about how that works. This is nothing personal.
Yeah.
Well, she'll sell 600 square feet as much as 5,000. Go ahead, Alison.
So we are actually entering into a real discussion here about what vision will look like. And we know there will be change, and change is uncomfortable and different. And we know that the people who live here, we want to welcome more people. In fact, that's like the vision of the housing strategy, is to say, everyone's welcome here. But as we exist right now, we can't welcome people who can't afford to buy more than $1 million home, right? So I think of the housing strategy, the city's strategic direction, and the official plan, all trying to work together to find the paths that just look a bit different than what we're used to. But we are going to be engaging on that. Not only council on their strategic vision for the very long term, but actually on the land use planning vision as well.
I agree. I hope that answers your question. Ladies and gentlemen, can we go home now? Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our team here, Jamie and Kyle and Alison. Thank you very much. David and Richard and Brianne. Send us emails. Hey, Mike. Good. How you doing?
Very well.
Well, thank you.
One thought, though.